I found the two of them in the lake house bedroom that faces the water, a room I had painted in mist gray, a color chosen for peace. Peace was not what I walked in on. Sienna's hair slid like ink across Richard's shoulder as she turned her head toward me. She didn't flinch. She smiled, small, almost apologetic, the way a pickpocket smiles when she returns the wallet she has already emptied. Richard, my husband of 23 years, civic lion, reliable auction paddle at every fundraiser, took a step back so fast his heel clipped the bed frame. He wasn't wearing his wedding ring. Funny what you notice when your bones go to snow. Maeve, he said, using the nickname that had once been a pressed flower between the pages of us. This is not what it looks like. Behind him the lake was winter glass. Behind me on the hallway table, the welcome baskets for the engagement weekend were tied with cream ribbons and sprigs of rosemary. I had arranged them myself. I was arranging them when I realized I couldn't find Sienna. I was arranging them when I chose, quite against tradition, not to knock. Then tell me what it looks like, I said. My voice surprised me. Not a tremor. Not a tear. Somewhere in the basement of my brain, an old newsroom bulb buzzed to life. Observe. Record. Don't bleed on the page. Sienna slid off the edge of the bed, satin robe whispering at her knees. Maeve, she said, as if giving comfort. This is complicated. Complicated. I repeated and tapped my phone side button twice. The camera woke, lens wide, unblinking. I didn't lift it. I didn't have to. Audio would be enough. Words are blades, you only need the right angle. Richard saw the phone and his face went white. Not guilt. Calculation. Turn that off. A request with a courtroom cadence. He took a step toward me, realized how that would play, retreated. Sienna's eyes traced the distance between us. Maeve, listen. I need to explain before. No, I said. You need to get dressed. Both of you. In 10 minutes we're announcing seating charts as if the world hasn't ended. That's what we're doing. Richard blinked. He'd expected hysterics. He'd expected bargaining. He had not expected logistics. Men like him rarely do. I closed the door. The hallway smelled like rosemary and wicker and the clean cold that slides off a lake. I walked to the kitchen, put my phone on the quartz and pressed play. In the living room, 24 peonies breathed softly in glass cylinders. I listened to my husband's scrambled sentence fragments until my hands steadied. It was an old trick from the field. Replay the shock in a safe room. Let the noise hit the far wall and fall. Mom! I turned. Danny stood in the archway, tie in one hand, his hair still damp from the shower. He looked like the younger version of his father before life taught him what to conceal and where to file it. You okay? He asked. Of course, I said. You look handsome. I crossed the room and did the time myself, fingers remembering the over-under, the cinch that sits right on the wishbone. I concentrated on the knot as if I could knot the world. Sienna came down 15 minutes later in a cream sweater and soft jeans, and the kind of contrition that looks good on camera. Richard followed wearing his ring again. The faint white indentation where it had not been was an alibi begging for a story. We staged brunch. Sunlight, laughter, clatter. The lake reflected square windows on the ceiling. I placed Danny by the window. I placed Sienna at his right. I took the seat opposite Richard so I could watch the flickers of his face the way I used to watch a mayor holding on to a lie. The toast I had drafted the night before sat in my notebook. Neat cursive loops singing about love multiplying love. I left it closed. Instead, I tapped my water glass and told the story of how Danny once tried to rescue a snapping turtle with a shoelace and a sandwich bag, and how he learned the difference between intention and outcome. People laughed. Danny blushed. Sienna watched me the way a safecracker watches a hinge. When the table burst into competing conversations, I slipped into the pantry and called Evelyn. She picked up on the first ring. If you're calling today, something is either very right or very wrong. Very wrong, I said. I found Richard with Sienna. Silence. Then a breath that sounded like a match. Tell me what you have. A clean audio clip. Nothing visual. And a stomach made of glass. Good. Glass lets you see the crack before it kills you. I could hear her chair scrape, the ritual of preparation. What are you thinking? I'm thinking I know how Richard hides money. And if Sienna is the honey trap I think she is, she's carrying the passwords in her perfume bottle. Then you're not going to throw anything, Evelyn said. You're going to inventory. You're going to be patient like weather. And you're going to let them think you are a woman who forgives. I'm not. I didn't say be. I said let them think. When I hung up I sent Jonah a single line. Need you. House later. No traces. He replied in 1 minute with a thumbs up and a ghost emoji. He had been my shadow in a dozen investigations. A brilliant chaos of server logs and coffee. He understood the gospel. Follow the money, and if money lies, follow the lies. Back in the kitchen I found Sienna alone rinsing champagne flutes. Sleeves pushed to the elbow. Diamond winking like salvation. She looked up at me and for 1 second the angle shifted. Not predator. Not prey. A woman. Young. Tired. Maeve, she said softly. Please. I clicked off the faucet. What is it that you think you can say to me that you can't say to Danny? Her composure trembled. That I made a mistake I can't undo. That I'm sorry for the mess it makes of people who don't deserve it. People like my son. Yes. She swallowed. And you. I waited. She lowered her eyes. Richard is not what you think. Oh, I said. I think he's exactly what I've always feared. I just didn't have the right name card on the fear. A pause. The kind that chooses a side. Then Sienna did something I didn't expect. She took off the ring. She set it on the rubber mat by the sink, so gently it didn't even click. Keep that safe, she whispered and left. I didn't move for a long beat. The ring lay there like a moon in a dish. When I finally picked it up, the diamond looked colder than the lake. That night, when the house settled and couples dispersed to rooms etched with initials and fishing dates, I changed into black. Old habits. I pulled my hair into a tight knot, slid my phone into the pocket sewn inside my cardigan, and patted down the back staircase that knows my steps. Richard kept a blue folder in the bottom drawer of the library desk, under a false base he installed after a break-in 10 years ago that he told everyone was about a stereo system. He liked good stories for bad reasons. I measured the drawer by memory and pressed the left corner until it clicked. The false base lifted like a lid. The folder was there, edges crisp. A life you'd never show your rotaries. I opened it. Not the ledger yet, that would come later. In part 1 you find the shell and the shadow, not the pearl. But what I found was enough. 3 letters of agreement with a consulting firm called VNR. Signatures digitized, payments structured via a charitable conduit that allowed deductibility for transactions that should never be deductible. I photographed the pages with the same reverence one uses in a chapel. Footsteps in the hallway. I shut the folder, slid the base into place and turned to the shelves. A book to hand, a spine to pretend. The door creaked. Richard stood there with a glass of Doble in his hand, and a face you'd call concerned if you didn't know its repertoire. You couldn't sleep either, he asked. Thinking about speeches. He shut the door with his heel and leaned in the threshold like a man on a magazine cover. We should talk about earlier. We should talk about VNR consulting, I said. The Doble didn't shake in his hand. His eyebrows rose, a performance note. What's that? Nothing you'd want on a donor wall. I lifted a book and pretended to read the back. Good night, Richard. He watched me a long time. Maeve, he said at last, and there it was, the plea, the promise, the man who built a city park and a lie of equal beauty. I love you. I know, I said and set the book down. And I know what you love more. I passed him in the doorway, and for half a second our shoulders touched. It felt like brushing against a closed safe. Heavy, cold, containing. On the landing outside the library, Sienna waited in the dark. She stepped from the shadow like a decision. We need to talk, she whispered. Not here. Tomorrow, I said. 9 a.m. The boathouse. She nodded. For the second time that day, she looked young enough to be saved. I didn't sleep. At dawn, the lake blew a thin veil of fog across the water, as if the night had exhaled its secrets and wasn't sure where to put them. At 9, the boathouse door creaked the way a secret creaks. Sienna came in with her hair in a braid and a sweatshirt that said Columbia in cracked letters, as if she'd thrifted the idea of a life. She closed the door and locked it. "Before you say anything," she blurted, "you have to understand. He found me when I was 19. He gave me rules and I thought rules were safety. I didn't know the rules were a leash." I said nothing. I clicked my phone on again. "Who is he to you, Sienna? Husband? Boss? Owner?" Her mouth twisted. "Teacher," she said, and then after a beat that burned, "partner." The word fell between us like a coin you don't want to pick up. "In what?" I asked, though I already knew. "In everything that looks like giving," she said, and 2 clean tears ran down her face like a confession. "He steals prettier than anyone I've ever met." The boathouse swallowed the sound of the lake slapping the pylons. Upstairs, the house rattled with breakfast. In the water, a loon called once and then thought better of it. "Tell me everything," I said, and the old newsroom bulb in my brain threw off sparks like it had never dimmed at all. By noon I had a list. Lizards shed their skins. Con men shed their LLCs. I'd learned the trick a lifetime ago. Don't chase the lizard, catalog the skins. V&R Consulting. Viridian and Rowe Investments. Vale and Rex Philanthropy Advisors. The ampersand to tell if you love typography as much as theft. Sienna, whose last name starts with V, flinched when she saw the third. "He said it was a joke," she muttered. "Men like Richard call foreshadowing a joke," I said. Sienna and I sat at my kitchen island with 2 mugs of coffee and a legal pad that had already sprouted tributaries of arrows. Jonah arrived through the mudroom with his backpack and a grin that faded the second he clocked Sienna. "This is either the worst idea or the only one," he said, and dumped a small museum of devices on the counter. Burner, air-gapped laptop, Faraday pouch, and a router that thinks it's a cactus. Looks harmless, pricks back. Detective Moreno couldn't be here. Jurisdiction and optics and a generational allergy to privileged kitchens, but she'd texted me a warning. "If you poke, expect a poke back." I believed her. We mapped flows. The Ellison Foundation paid a slate of micro-grantees. Those grantees hired V&R for capacity building. V&R subcontracted to Viridian and Rowe for impact evaluation. Fees bloomed like algae. Money evaporated somewhere sunny. "Where does it end?" I asked. "In places where weather is mostly conceptual," Jonah said, fingers blurring. "Cayman, Nevis, Wyoming, believe it or not. We hide from our own better than anyone." Sienna hunched over the pad. "Rory handles the physical. Safety deposit boxes, handoffs and parking structures that smell like old gum. Richard never touches the cash, only the wire." I watched her. She didn't dramatize. She reported. It mattered. "Why Danny?" I asked finally. "Of all the boys in all the bars." She didn't pretend not to understand. "He wasn't a mark," she said flatly. "Neither were you. We were supposed to get close to the donors whose names you never put in emails. Richard needed the back channel. Danny was." She rubbed her eyes. "He was the accident that felt like a life." "Accidents don't sign NDAs," Jonah muttered. Sienna flinched. I felt a flash of something I didn't want to name. Not compassion. Not yet. Recognition, maybe, of a mortal caught in a god's idea of order. My phone buzzed. A text from Richard. "Lunch? Just us. Talk. Benign phrasing, dangerous ellipses." I replied, 2 p.m. Willow and Maine. Jonah looked up. "You're going to let him pitch?" "He's going to put me on a leash," I said. "I want to see its length." At Willow and Maine, the maitre d' treated us like royalty, being discreet. Richard ordered for me without asking, halibut, no butter, because control masquerades as care. He kept his hands flat on the table, wedding ring catching light for witnesses. "I made a mistake," he began. "Which?" I asked. His eyes cooled a degree. "Sienna. Try again." A pause. "The secrecy," he said and leaned in. "It's been a hard year, Maeve. The foundation, compliance is a labyrinth. We retain vendors. We make choices. Some look messy on paper. It's not what you think. I think you're transferring donor money through a nonprofit daisy chain into structures you own, I said gently. With a girl half our age as your smiling courier. He didn't startle. He poured wine. You always did like to draw monsters on maps. He sipped. I love you. I want this marriage. I want the future we made. What future is that? I asked. Show me on a K1. He smiled the way some men open knives. You were happier when you were writing about other men's sins, he said. You've become a little hungry. For blood. Truth, I said. I'm hungry for truth. He touched my wrist. Soft. Then stop starving yourself with stories. When the check came, the server placed it between us as if it were neutral ground. Richard slid it to his side, signed without looking. We'll fix this, he said. You and me. Our way. Outside, February sunlight bounced off snowbanks like a bad idea. My phone buzzed. Jonah. Your decoy donor pinged Sienna's inbox, then bounced to a proton mail tagged Rory. Clockwork. I watched Richard's reflection in the restaurant window as he said something to a man I recognized from a development board. The reflection smiled, the light caught in its teeth. When I turned away, Sienna stood across the street in the shadow of a bus shelter. Hood up. She raised her hand the smallest degree. Not a wave, a flag. Back home, I put the ring Sienna had given me into the safe I kept behind the flower bin. I added the blue folder photos, wrote a date on the envelope, and slid it in. On the envelope under the date, I wrote a single line in block letters. In case I vanish. Night fell quickly. It always does when the chapter ends. Sienna arrived at the boathouse with her hood up, eyes rimmed in sleeplessness. She locked the door behind her as though the fog outside carried ears. I was never supposed to love him, she said, words quick, desperate. Danny was collateral. Richard wanted proximity to your family's influence. The foundation's real gold isn't the money. It's the access. Donors, politicians, old money that doesn't like audits. He knew marrying me to your son would tie every handshake to the Ellison name. She pressed her palms together as if in prayer. He taught me to fish for secrets with charm. A honey trap. That's what I've been. That's all I am. I felt the world tilt. My son, my earnest, hopeful Danny, was a pawn in a chess game his father had been rigging from the start. Why tell me this now? I asked. Her eyes flicked to the window. Because Rory doesn't trust me anymore. And Richard, he doesn't need me once the marriage is done. I'll disappear, Maeve. Or worse. I tapped my phone screen. Recording. Then give me proof. She swallowed. Passwords. Routing numbers. He makes me memorize them so nothing's ever written down. I can give you a trail, but it's dangerous. Dangerous is relative, I said. Try betrayal in your own home. For the first time since this began, Sienna looked like a girl instead of a weapon. That evening at the engagement rehearsal dinner, I tested her story. The dining hall was all golden light and polished wood. Glasses chimed. Laughter echoed against the beams. Richard was in full charm mode, telling some tired story about the mayor and a golf club mishap. Guests leaned in, enchanted. I raised my wineglass and said deliberately, "We're so fortunate to welcome support from one of our newest benefactors, Mr. Graydon Wells. His generosity humbles me." Graydon Wells didn't exist. He was my decoy donor, stitched together by Jonah in a burner database that morning. An hour later I excused myself and checked my phone. An alert glowed on screen. Decoy donor name accessed. Encrypted forward to Rory. Nash at Proton. Sienna had been telling the truth. She was the leak. When I returned, Richard kissed my cheek in front of everyone, the doting husband. "To Maeve," he toasted. "The compass of this family." Applause rang. My smile held. But I imagined the compass needle spinning wildly, pointing not north but straight into hell. Later, Evelyn called it the wineglass doctrine. "Drop the poison in the prettiest glass," she said. "If they drink, you know their thirst." Richard had drunk deeply. And so had Sienna. 2 nights later, the lake house was broken into. No smashed windows, no alarms. Just a subtle shift. A drawer I knew had been locked, now ajar. And inside, the one folder I'd hidden with original grant documents was gone. I called Detective Moreno at midnight. She arrived before dawn, trench coat dusted with frost, eyes sharp. "This wasn't kids," she said, scanning the study. "This was surgical. Someone who knows your rhythms." Richard stood behind us, robe-belted, sipping coffee. He played the indignant husband beautifully. "What's next, Arya? You'll suggest my wife staged it herself?" Moreno didn't blink. "Maybe you did, Richard. Convenient, isn't it?" The only drawer touched was hers. His jaw tightened. He didn't like a woman who refused his script. As Moreno left, she touched my arm. Quietly. "You're in the middle of something with teeth. Don't let it bite before you know its shape." That night, I sat awake in the darkened library. Every creak of the old house sounded like an intruder. Every shadow was a knife. Richard came in late, kissed the top of my head, whispered, "We'll be fine." But his cologne was too sharp, his words too smooth. And when he left the room, the silence he left behind had edges. The house was full of quiet knives, and one of them had my name on it. Danny started noticing the fractures. At brunch he asked Sienna about a volunteer trip she had once sworn shaped her life. She stumbled, "Wrong city, wrong year." Danny laughed it off, but I saw the first crack in his blind devotion. Richard, meanwhile, doubled down. He booked dinners, just us. Sent flowers to my office, left handwritten notes tucked into books he knew I loved. It wasn't romance, it was strategy. He was trying to replace suspicion with nostalgia. One night he cornered me in the study. "Maeve," he said, voice low, "we've built something beautiful. Don't let paranoia burn it down." I tapped my phone's side button under the desk. "Paranoia," I repeated. "Or discovery." His smile didn't falter, but I caught it in the reflection of the window. Mask slipping for a fraction of a second. The mirror had shown me the man behind the husband. Jonah's tracework exploded across my kitchen table. Spaghetti lines of accounts, sub-accounts, shell firms with names like Evergreen Impact Solutions and Blue Horizon Partners. "Richard's the whale," Jonah muttered. "These little shells are just minnows. He swims, they scatter, and by the time regulators catch one, the whale's long gone." Sienna leaned over, pale. "He made me memorize access codes for 2 of these. Said it was a safety net if anything happened to him." I wrote them down. My pen shook once, then steadied. This wasn't just laundering. It was empire. Richard had built a whole cathedral of theft, hiding behind stained glass philanthropy. And Sienna was both acolyte and altar. The engagement dinner rehearsal was a theater of smiles. Danny beamed, oblivious, while family friends raised their glasses. Sienna charmed the room, her laugh sliding like silk over every surface. I had laid a second trap. A fabricated donor, Marjorie Kell, supposedly from Boston. Only Evelyn and Jonah knew she didn't exist. Halfway through dessert, I overheard Sienna on the balcony with Richard. "She's good," Sienna whispered. That name, Marjorie Kell, came up at brunch. Richard cursed under his breath. I leaned against the doorway, invisible in shadow. Confirmation. The bait had worked. When they re-entered the dining hall, they smiled wide like actors hitting their cues. But I knew, the scene was mine now. Jonah's forensic taps revealed encrypted late-night calls bouncing from Sienna's burner to a Proton mail handle tagged Rory Nash, the fixer, the shadow. Meanwhile, Detective Moreno squeezed a junior banker who'd handled one of Richard's donor-advised funds. The man cracked. Unusual withdrawals, cash couriered in envelopes that smelled of cologne. That night, as I drove home, headlights loomed too close in my mirror. The car tailed me for 6 miles before peeling off into the dark. At the lake, water slapped the dock in uneasy rhythm. I stood there, the cold gnawing my skin, and whispered to myself, "Dark water hides deep bodies." In the library, I went for the false bottom drawer again. This time I found it. The blue folder. Inside, offshore trust diagrams, annotated with Richard's handwriting. Charts mapping out donor leverage, names of senators, CEOs, journalists. Beside them red ink notes hold threatened by. And tucked in the back a single-page profile. Sienna Vale. Diobe. Foster homes. Arrest expunged at 17. A note? Asset. Control via debt plus affection. Deploy as companion or fiancé where advantageous. My stomach turned cold. She wasn't his accident. She was his invention. When I confronted Sienna the next morning, she broke. He found me. Saved me. But every favor was a chain. I thought marrying Danny could be my escape. Her eyes were wet, her voice trembling. Please, Maeve. Help me cut the leash. I closed the folder, pulse steady. For the first time, I wasn't just a betrayed wife. I was a strategist again. And Richard Ellison had just made me his deadliest opponent. The boathouse was damp, the boards groaning under the lake's breath. Sienna sat across from me, knees pulled to her chest, eyes swollen. He owns me, she whispered. Richard saved me from being nothing. But he kept me. I caught them in the lake house bedroom, the one painted mist gray. I wanted peace, but that's not what I found. Sienna's hair, black as ink, was draped across Richard's shoulder as she turned to face me. No flinching. Just a small, almost apologetic smile, like a pickpocket returning an empty wallet. Richard, my husband of 23 years, a pillar of the community, always ready to bid at charity auctions, stumbled back so fast he clipped the bed frame with his heel. His wedding ring was missing. It's funny what you notice when you feel your insides turning to ice. Maeve, he said, using the pet name that used to be something special between us, a cherished memory. It's not what it looks like. Behind him the lake was like frozen glass. Behind me on the hallway table were the welcome baskets for the engagement weekend, tied with cream-colored ribbons and sprigs of rosemary. I'd arranged them myself. I was putting them together when I realized Sienna was gone. That's when I decided, breaking with tradition, not to knock. Then tell me what it looks like, I said, surprised at how steady my voice was. No shaking, no tears. Somewhere deep in my mind, an old reporter's instinct kicked in. Observe. Record everything. Don't let emotions cloud your judgment. Sienna slid off the bed, her satin robe rustling softly. Maeve, she said like she was comforting me. It's complicated. Complicated. I repeated and quickly tapped the side button on my phone twice. The camera app opened, lens wide and ready. I didn't need to lift it. The audio would be enough. Words can be weapons if you know how to use them. Richard saw the phone and his face paled. Not guilt but calculation. Turn that off. It was a demand, delivered with the force of a lawyer in court. He started to step toward me, then thought better of it and backed away. Sienna's eyes flicked back and forth between us. Maeve, please listen. I need to explain before. No, I said. You both need to get dressed. In 10 minutes we're announcing the seating arrangements like nothing's happened. That's what we're doing. Richard blinked, clearly thrown off. He'd been expecting tears, maybe pleading. He hadn't expected logistics. Men like him rarely do. I shut the door behind me. The hallway smelled of rosemary, wicker, and the cold, clean scent that drifts off the lake. I walked into the kitchen, set my phone on the quartz countertop and pressed play. In the living room, 24 peonies sat in glass vases, their petals unfurling. I listened to my husband stammering, disjointed sentences until my hands stopped shaking. It was an old trick I'd learned covering crime. Replay the shock in a safe place. Let the impact hit a distant wall. Mom! I turned around. Danny was standing in the doorway, a tie in his hand, his hair still wet from the shower. He looked like a younger version of his father, before life had taught him what to hide and where to bury it. Are you okay? He asked. Of course, I said. You look great. I went over to him and tied his tie myself, my fingers automatically making the familiar knot. I focused on the tie as if I could somehow tie the world together. Sienna came downstairs 15 minutes later, wearing a cream-colored sweater and jeans, looking contrite in a way that would play well on camera. Richard followed, wearing his wedding ring again. The faint white line where it had been missing was like an alibi begging to be told. We put on a show of having brunch. Sunlight streamed in, there was forced laughter and the clinking of silverware. The lake reflected the rectangular windows on the ceiling. I put Danny by the window. I seated Sienna to his right. I took the seat across from Richard so I could watch the expressions on his face, the way I used to watch a politician trying to hold on to a lie. The toast I'd written the night before, full of pretty words about love, sat untouched in my notebook. Instead, I tapped my water glass and told the story about how Danny had once tried to save a snapping turtle with a shoelace and a sandwich bag, and how he'd learned the difference between good intentions and actual results. People laughed. Danny blushed. Sienna watched me like a professional thief studying a lock. When the table dissolved into several conversations, I slipped away to the pantry and called Evelyn. She answered on the first ring. If you're calling me today, something is either very, very good or very, very bad. Very, very bad, I said. I caught Richard with Sienna. There was a moment of silence. Then I heard a breath that sounded like a match being struck. Tell me what you've got. A clean audio recording. No visuals. And my stomach feels like it's made of glass. Good. Glass lets you see the cracks before they kill you. I could hear her chair scraping, the sound of her getting ready for action. What are you thinking? I'm thinking I know how Richard hides his money, and if Sienna is the honeypot I think she is, she's probably carrying the passwords in her perfume bottle. Then you're not going to do anything rash, Evelyn said. You're going to take inventory. You're going to be patient like the weather, and you're going to let them think you're a woman who forgives. I'm not. I didn't say be it. I said let them think it. When I hung up I sent Jonah a simple text. Need you. House later. No traces. He texted back immediately with a thumbs up and a ghost emoji. He'd been my shadow on countless investigations. A genius at digging through server logs and fueled by caffeine. He understood the most important rule. Follow the money, and if the money is lying, follow the lies. Back in the kitchen I found Sienna alone, washing champagne glasses, her sleeves pushed up to her elbows, the diamond on her ring flashing like a sign of redemption. She looked up at me and for a second I saw something different in her eyes. Not a predator, not prey. Just a woman. Young. Tired. Maeve, she said softly. Please. I turned off the water. What do you think you can say to me that you can't say to Danny? Her composure cracked. That I made a mistake I can't take back. That I'm sorry for the pain it's causing to people who don't deserve it. People like my son. Yes. She swallowed hard. And you. I waited for her to continue. She looked down. Richard isn't who you think he is. Oh, I said. I think he's exactly who I've always been afraid he was. I just didn't have the right label for the fear. There was a pause like a breath held. Then Sienna did something I didn't expect. She took off her ring. She placed it on the rubber mat by the sink so gently it didn't even make a sound. Keep that safe, she whispered and left the room. I stood there for a moment not moving. The ring sat there like a fallen moon. When I finally picked it up, the diamond felt colder than the lake. That night, after the house had quieted down and the couples had gone to their rooms, I changed into black clothing. It was an old habit. I pulled my hair back into a tight bun, slipped my phone into the hidden pocket inside my sweater, and quietly went down the back stairs that knew my every step. Richard kept a blue folder in the bottom drawer of his desk in the library, hidden under a false bottom he'd installed after a break-in 10 years ago. He told everyone the burglars were after a stereo system. He liked spinning stories to cover up his tracks. I remembered the measurements of the drawer, and pressed the left corner until I heard the click. The false bottom lifted easily. The folder was there, its edges sharp. A life he'd never show to anyone. I opened it. Not the full ledger yet, that would come later. Part 1 is about finding the outer layers, not the core secrets. But what I found was enough. 3 letters of agreement with a consulting firm called VNR, the signatures digital, the payments structured through a charitable organization to make them tax-deductible when they shouldn't have been. I photographed the pages with the care you'd give something sacred. I heard footsteps in the hallway. I closed the folder, slid the false bottom back into place, and turned toward the bookshelves. I grabbed a book, pretending to read. The door creaked open. Richard was standing there with a glass of double tequila in his hand, wearing a concerned expression that I knew was fake. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. "Thinking about the speeches." He closed the door with his heel and leaned against the frame, striking a pose. "We should talk about what happened earlier. We should talk about V&R Consulting," I said. The tequila didn't even shake in his hand. He raised his eyebrows, a practiced move. "What's that?" "Nothing you'd want your name on for a donation plaque." I held up the book and pretended to read the back cover. "Good night, Richard." He watched me for a long time. "Maeve," he said finally, and there it was, the plea, the promise from the man who'd built a city park and a beautiful lie. "I love you." "I know," I said and put the book down. "And I know what you love even more." I walked past him in the doorway, and for a second our shoulders brushed. It felt like touching a locked safe. Heavy, cold, and full of secrets. On the landing outside the library, Sienna was waiting in the shadows. She stepped out like she was making a decision. "We need to talk," she whispered. "Not here." "Tomorrow," I said. 9 a.m. The boathouse. She nodded. For the second time that day, she looked like she could still be saved. I couldn't sleep. At dawn, the lake sent a thin layer of fog drifting across the water, as if it was exhaling all the secrets of the night and didn't know where to put them. At 9 o'clock, the boathouse door creaked open like a secret being revealed. Sienna came in, her hair in a braid, wearing a sweatshirt that said Columbia in faded letters, as if she'd bought a second-hand version of a life. She closed the door and locked it behind her. "Before you say anything," she blurted out, "you have to understand. He found me when I was 19 years old. He set the rules for me and I thought rules were safety. I didn't know the rules were a leash." I didn't say anything. I started the voice recorder on my phone again. "What is he to you, Sienna? A husband? A boss? An owner?" Her face twisted. "A teacher," she said. Then after a long, heavy pause, "A partner." The word dropped between us like a coin nobody wanted to pick up. "Partner in what?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "In everything that looks like generosity," she said. 2 tears ran down her face like a confession. "He steals more beautifully than anyone I've ever met." The boathouse seemed to swallow the sound of the lake lapping against the pilings. Upstairs, the house was filled with the sounds of breakfast being made. Out on the water, a loon called once and then stopped. "Tell me everything," I said, and the old reporter in my brain started firing on all cylinders. By noon I had a list. Crooks shed their corporations just like lizards shed their skin. I learned this a long time ago. Don't chase after the con man, track the companies. V&R Consulting, Viridian and Rowe Investments, Vale and Rex Philanthropy Advisors. The ampersand was a tell, if you love fonts as much as you love theft. Sienna, whose last name starts with a V, visibly cringed when she saw the third name. "He told me that was a joke," she said quietly. "Men like Richard consider foreshadowing a joke," I said. Sienna and I sat at the kitchen island with 2 mugs of coffee and a legal pad that was covered in notes and arrows. Jonah came in through the mudroom wearing his just useful enough, never truly free. I scrutinized her, recognizing she was both a perpetrator and a casualty, and I had to determine which aspect held greater weight. "You want a way out?" I inquired. She nodded in affirmation. "But Rory would eliminate me before Richard ever had to get his hands dirty." I deactivated my recording device. "Then here's the decision you face. Remain as the trapped or become the informant. You cannot occupy both roles simultaneously." For the first instance, she regarded me not as an adversary, but as an associate. "I'll provide you with everything," she declared. "However, if Danny ever uncovers the complete truth, he'll never be able to forgive me." I locked eyes with her. "Then we offer him the version of the truth he can accept, not the one that destroys him." That evening, I composed what Evelyn had once instructed me. A burn list outlining items I was prepared to sacrifice and those I would hold sacred. Sacrifice: my marriage, my reputation, my sense of security. Sacred: my son, the organization's integrity, the truth, even if fragmented. When Jonah arrived, I presented the burn list across the table. He frowned with concern. "You're setting the stage for a war." "I'm preparing for survival." Sienna added her contributions. Rory's drop locations, codes Richard employed, and the designated phrases for transferring funds. Each piece of information was a weapon, and I refined each one meticulously. We outlined the plan. Entice Richard into transferring a final portion of money, capturing him with evidence of his intentions, and compelling Moreno to take action. "Are you certain you can place your trust in her?" Jonah questioned. I glanced toward Sienna. Her hands trembled as she sipped her coffee, but her eyes possessed a steely resolve. "She stands to lose more than I do," I responded. "That makes her dependable, at least for the present." The carefully placed leak achieved its purpose. Jonah subtly introduced a tip into an anonymous journalist forum. Within 48 hours, rumors of irregularities within the Ellison Foundation began to circulate. Richard grew visibly agitated, skipping dinners, pacing late into the night, and engaging in abrupt, terse phone calls. "The press are like gnats," he stated. "You swat one and three more appear. Remain composed." However, the following morning, federal auditors contacted his office. That afternoon, I was the one who received a visit from 2 SEC agents bearing a subpoena with my name displayed prominently. "Mrs. Ellison, we have evidence indicating you've engaged in insider trading utilizing foundation accounts," one agent stated matter-of-factly. My blood turned to ice. Richard wasn't simply running scared. He was turning the full force against me. At the station, Moreno escorted me to a private room. "He's framing you. I believe you, but I require further evidence. Provide me with something undeniable, Maeve, or he'll emerge victorious." I departed with a record tarnished by fingerprints and a reputation. The false dawn had arrived, but the true sunrise was still distant. Danny discovered the truth. He stormed into the kitchen, clutching the engagement ring box, his face drained of color. "She confessed everything," he revealed, his voice trembling with emotion. "The affair, the arrangement." Sienna remained motionless, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Danny, please," he interrupted her abruptly. "You were exploiting me." "I wasn't," she sobbed uncontrollably. "Not you. Never you." He then directed his gaze toward me, radiating betrayal. "You were aware of it. Both of you were aware." I attempted to speak, but my throat constricted. In that instant, my son appeared as someone I had already lost. Richard entered, his timing impeccable, wearing a mask of sorrow. "Danny," he said softly, "come with me. Let's get some fresh air." Danny followed him out. As the door closed, Sienna collapsed, whispering, "He'll turn him against us, against me, against you." I lifted her by the shoulders. "Then we sever the leash before he tightens it." Jonah's surveillance uncovered a clandestine meeting. Sienna and Rory, captured in grainy footage at a downtown parking garage. Rory appeared as a shadowy figure in a leather jacket, his voice low and menacing. "Richard's finished. One final sweep, then we disappear. Cayman Islands. Zurich. He retains the house, we claim the cash." Sienna nodded in agreement, sliding him a slip of paper. She noticed the hidden microphone I had placed on her necklace and deliberately pressed it against her throat as she said, "Account details. Tomorrow night." As she walked away, she whispered into the tiny microphone, barely audible, "It's yours now, Maeve." The following evening, Moreno orchestrated her sting operation. Jonah connected to the feeds. Sienna enticed Rory with the promise of one last handoff. However, as I observed the monitor, I recognized the inherent danger. If Rory suspected a setup, Sienna might not escape unscathed. To protect my son, I was entrusting the woman who had once been intimate with my husband. And to bring down the giant I had to be the one holding the blade. The vault resembled an underground cathedral of steel. No windows. No clocks. Only the steady hum of the air conditioning and the relentless gaze of cameras that Jonah claimed to have temporarily disabled for 30 minutes. Sienna arrived first, carrying a messenger bag across her body, her face conveying innocence. Rory followed shortly after, projecting a casual air of predation, his hands in his pockets, his eyes sweeping across the corners. I observed from the operations van with Moreno, the monitors illuminating our faces. "Show me what you've got," Rory commanded. Sienna slid a safety deposit key across the counter. "Room 12, she whispered. "Wire instructions are inside." Rory took the key unhurried. He relished the anticipation of the inevitable. He disappeared beyond the frosted door. We heard the faint click of metal and the soft thud of a box being placed down. "Now," Moreno announced into her sleeve. Agents moved swiftly. The hallway narrowed as badges and black jackets flooded it. Rory opened the box, then froze. It wasn't cash, but copies of financial documents, account trees, transfer schedules, and a second key labeled B. Ellis in blue. He realized he had been maneuvered into a checkmate position with no escape. He turned on Sienna, his face devoid of any human emotion. "You," he said accusingly. "Hands," Moreno snapped, stepping forward. Rory smiled and calculated the odds. Then he acted swiftly and forcefully, shoving the box aside, sending paper scattering like white birds. He bolted. Agents collided, alarms blared, and one camera flickered back to life. "Cut him off at the stairwell," Moreno barked. Rory reached the landing to find 2 agents and 20 years of neglecting his health. He grabbed the railing, a fleetingly bad idea. Then he raised his hands in surrender. "All right," he said. "You got me." Back in the van, Sienna was visibly trembling. I clasped her hands in mine, they were ice cold. "What if he flips?" she whispered anxiously. "He will," I responded. "That's the entire point. On me. On Richard." Her eyes met mine. For once we shared the same objective with the same unwavering resolve. Rory cooperated within 24 hours. His demands were straightforward. Protection, a deal that wouldn't imprison him for life, and permission to enjoy his cynicism and freedom. In exchange, he provided us with a ledger only he and Richard had ever accessed. A private spreadsheet stored on a drive that had never been connected to the internet. It contained names, dates, amounts, and cross-referenced leverage, photos, emails, loans, and embarrassing scholarships for non-existent nephews, and a schedule outlining a final panic sweep plan for the following day. If executed, it would funnel millions through dummy accounts into a Wyoming trust disguised as a church organization. Moreno's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Intent. Pattern. Conspiracy. Wire fraud. Charitable fraud. Take your pick. Jonah printed the most incriminating pages and placed them in a new blue folder. He gave me a grim smile. Poetry. We planned the takedown. The next day's sweep would proceed as scheduled, but we would control the endpoints. When Richard attempted to withdraw the funds, the wire would catch on our hook. On paper, it would appear as a routine transaction. On playback, it would expose everything he had concealed. I went home early, set the table, lit 2 candles, and waited. The familiar routine calmed me. Knife to the right of the plate, glass above the blade, napkin folded like a sail. Richard arrived late, kissed the air near my cheek, and sat down. The candles cast halos he didn't deserve. "Rough day?" I inquired casually. He spread his hands. "Misunderstandings. People thrive on scandal. They pretend they've uncovered the devil in the details." I poured wine. "Maybe the devil isn't in the details," I suggested. "Maybe he's in the design." He studied me intently. "You're being unusually poetic." "Old habits," I replied, clinking his glass. "To the future." He drank and I followed, our eyes locked. The sweep commenced at 9 o'clock. In the operations room, 3 screens displayed seemingly nothing and everything. Terminal windows, green text, and arrows blinking like heart monitors. First transfer initiated, Jonah announced. VNR to Viridian and Row. Here comes the hop. Marino's team mirrored each move with lawful warrants that would appear on the record as an inevitable chain of events. At 9:07 the money reached the donor-advised fund. At 9:09 it was flagged for transfer to St. Lucie Charitable Holdings, a trust with dubious motives. Block in 3-2 hold release, Jonah whispered, making his code sorcery appear as divine intervention. At 9:12 Richard called me. I put him on speaker. How's your morning? I asked. Lively, he responded tersely. Meet me at the lake house. Now. The lake was swept with wind, clouds hanging low. Richard stood on the dock in a coat as dark as the waves, his hands in his pockets, appearing like a king surveying a lost kingdom. You've been busy, he said when I reached him. So have you, I replied. He turned, his charm vanished. Why, Maeve? I laughed, suppressing the urge to scream. Because you destroyed what we built and called it love. He stepped closer, the air heavy with rain and insincere remorse. You won't survive this, he said softly. Neither will Danny. Threaten me if you wish, I retorted. But threaten my son, and I will burn the world down. He searched my face for the naive woman who had believed in his illusions. He didn't find her. Behind us, unmarked cars pulled up the drive. Footsteps crunched on gravel. Marino's voice, official and clear, announced, Richard Ellison, you're under arrest. He didn't run, either too proud or too weary. Perhaps both. He lifted his hands, his wedding ring glinting one last time, and said calmly, Call my lawyer. As they escorted him to the car, he finally looked at me, not with rage, but with a bewildered tenderness, as if I had betrayed him. It almost worked, almost. The clouds broke and the lake shimmered. Open water, honest in its emptiness. Indictments landed with the impact of winter branches snapping under ice. Wire fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement, charitable solicitation without disclosure. A litany of charges long enough to serve as a numerical obituary. Rory's testimony was polished, rehearsed, and revolting. Sienna's was different. Raw, hesitant, yet precise. She cited dates, locations, and phrases Richard used when he wanted her to transfer money without questioning. She recounted the first time he presented her with a wire form and called it our test. The judge observed her for a long time. Ms. Vale, he stated, you were an adult. Yes, Your Honor, she replied. I was also owned. Danny sat on the bench behind me, his shoulders rigid, his eyes filled with tears. He didn't touch my arm. But when Sienna finished, he stood up without thinking, as if drawn by an invisible thread connecting mercy and memory. Richard accepted a plea bargain, not out of remorse but out of calculation. He agreed to cooperate on related cases to minimize his sentence. Even then, the years accumulated like cordwood. We exited the courthouse into the March sunlight, faint but promising. The press swarmed us, microphones thrusting forward. I kept my head down, my hand on Danny's back, and walked on. That night our house felt empty. Each room had been a stage. Now each was barren. I sat at the kitchen island. Danny leaned against the sink. Do you love her? I asked, understanding that avoiding the question had turned our lives into a collection of falsehoods. He stared out the window, his reflection showing an older version of himself. I don't know, he said. I loved who I thought she was. I hate what she did. I see the child in the story she told. I'm tired, Mom. I nodded. Tired is honest. He looked at me. And you? Do you love him? I allowed the question to linger until we could both bear the answer. I loved the years we were who we said we were, I said. I do not love the man he chose to become. He exhaled as if making a decision. Okay. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a place to begin. We sold the townhouse and moved back to the lake house, the original one I had painted in mist gray for tranquility. This time I chose a different color. A white with a hint of blue, resembling clear breath in winter. Fresh paint for clean walls, not forgetting but beginning. The foundation survived. We dismantled the illicit shell companies, shut down the daisy chain, and rebuilt the board with individuals who valued transparency. We made every grant, fee, and administrative cost public, easily accessible even to a teenager. Our donors, those who remained, embraced the beauty of receipts. Evelyn sent me a note on a postcard of a lighthouse. Truth is not kind, but it is clean. Keep it that way. Sienna entered protective custody, then the witness relocation program with a name so bland it sounded safe. She sent Danny one letter through Moreno, screened, redacted, but genuine. It said simply, I am learning how to be a person without a leash. I hope you become the doctor you wanted to be. I will spend my life paying what I owe. Danny didn't write back, not then, maybe never. Healing follows its own timeline. Richard sent 2 letters from prison. The first was all show. Misjudgments, bad advisors, and a conspiracy fueled by envy. We didn't respond. The second was shorter. He asked about the lake, whether the loons had returned. I wrote one sentence on a postcard of the dock at dusk. They're here. I didn't sign it. Some ghosts don't need names. On a late spring evening, I retrieved the blue folder from the safe, removed the copies that had once been weapons, and inserted something else. A printed document titled Conflict of Interest Policy, complete with signatures, dates, and enforceable clauses. I placed the folder back under the false bottom, a reliquary not of sin but of safeguards. I walked to the dock. The water sparkled with tiny fragments of light. I took off my shoes, rolled up my pants, and stepped in. The cold sharpened my senses. From the kitchen, music drifted. Danny humming over flashcards, a future reassembling itself. I thought of the woman I had been when I first pressed record on my phone, the one who believed peace could be painted on a wall. I loved her and I let her go. Behind me, the house was no longer a stage for silent betrayals. It was a place where we would eat, read, and rebuild. Open water in front of me, a clean slate behind me, and somewhere out there a young woman learning to live free. I didn't forgive Richard and I didn't forget Sienna, but I did something else. I chose the truth and I kept choosing it until it became as natural as breathing. The loons called, the evening responded, and the lake at last claimed only what belonged to it.